the Jewish story for me is not some story somewhere else. I have a strong connection. The Palestinian narrative is that the Israelis, they're genocidal. But inside the Israeli hospital, that teenager was getting the same care as any other Israeli patient. And so the stories that I was told didn't match the reality that I saw.
Welcome to What Came After. I'm your host, Manya Marcus. On What Came After, we'll take a look at the many ways that people's lives changed on and after the brutal massacre in Israel on October 7th, 2023. We'll be speaking with people in Israel and around the world about how the devastating attack by Hamas has shifted, shaped, and changed them. To learn more about our podcast, please visit us at whatcameafter.com. Dr. Nasreen Abu Atta was born in East Jerusalem to a Christian Arab Israeli family. Nasreen attended Ben Gurion Medical School in Israel as well as the Columbia University Medical School in New York. Nasreen is fluent in Arabic, Hebrew, English, and French, which enabled her to work with diverse populations in their native language during her training in Israel. Nasreen has also worked with different underserved populations in the United States, including veterans, refugees, asylum seekers, youth at risk, transitional youth, youth in foster care, and various American Indian tribes. Nasreen currently works as a psychiatrist in Iowa, where her practice focuses on ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. She hosts a podcast, My Grandmother's Blessings, which you can find in the episode description. Hi, Nasreen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to start by asking you about your background, personal and also professional.
Yeah, so I was born in Jerusalem in Israel. I always find it interesting because a lot of times people assume that I'm Jewish when I say I'm from Israel. And I always tell them 80% chance you would have been right. But there is the 20% chance of people that are Arab in Israel. And so I belong to that small minority. So I am born in Jerusalem, part of the minority that's 20% in Israel. But then there is another minority within that 20% of Christians. And that's 1% about, on the population. So, and it's interesting because I was born in an Islamic hospital. My mother worked there. And so my name on my birth certificate says I'm born in an Islamic hospital, even though I'm not Muslim. And at the time where I grew up, it was called East Jerusalem, but now they don't refer to it as East Jerusalem, but it's still part of Israel. And so the community that I grew up in is Arab, majority Muslim. And I went to a Catholic Arab school from kindergarten through 12th grade. And even in the Catholic school, the majority of the students were Muslim because it's serving Arab population. So even in my class and with my classmates, I was a minority there too. In Arabic culture, having sons is very much valued. We even keep track of the names so that in school, when they call your name, they call it your name and then you go by all the patriarchs, your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather. So in my household, I had no brothers. So that's even another minority too. I have 3 other sisters. And so I went through school from K through 12. Initially, I was in a French school and then I got switched to an Arab school. And I went through the Palestinian educational system in East Jerusalem. The education was originally at one point Jordanian and then it got switched to Palestinian. So my high school last exam was the Palestinian high school education. Then after that, when I finished, I wanted to go to the JUS. And so I got a scholarship and I did my undergrad in the States. I was in North Carolina. I wanted to become a doctor. And so I followed the American path. So I did the undergrad science and I did chemistry and math. And then for my education as a physician, I went back to Israel. My medical school was a collaboration between 2 medical schools. One was in Israel and then Columbia University in New York. So then I went back to Israel, to Ben Gurion University in the South. I did my med school training. And then I came back to the States for my residency training. And then I trained as a family medicine doc and a psychiatrist.
And now what do you do?
So now I'm in private practice. I do psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Right now that's with ketamine. A lot of my practice is very much therapy oriented. I do medications, but therapy is a very important component for me. So.
I want to go back and ask you a little bit about what you meant in terms of transitioning from a Jordanian curriculum to a Palestinian curriculum. There is a lot of speculation right now about what a Palestinian curriculum is. Is it different in Gaza than it is in other parts of the territories? Could you speak a little bit to that, sort of in light of all these questions about what that can mean?
So up until I forget what also agreements were, I think it was the 90s, the curriculum fell under Jordan. Even though it was, I was in Jerusalem, which was part of Israel, the education for some reason was managed under the Jordanian education. So we had to study about the king, the kingdom, all these Jordanian kind of systems. When also agreements happened and then the PLO came on, they began to transition to the Palestinian education, which they have kept now. So you're learning about Palestinian government, voting system, Palestinian history. That was education that I got under that.
I hope this is okay to ask, but there are these questions about UNRWA and how they influence the curriculum. Now that you've been exposed to so many different curricula, American, Israeli, Jordanian, Palestinian, do you feel that it's founded, that there is actual anti-Semitism that's embedded within the curriculum that you experienced?
This is interesting because I got raised with the story of the Nakba. And the Nakba is the Palestinian story or belief or narrative that when the country of Israel was established, there was a massacre of the Palestinians. The Palestinians were killed. They had to leave. That was what I was raised with that kind of education. Did it take into other account the Israeli narrative about the Holocaust and all that? No, it was not really taught or talked about. At least when I took the curriculum, this is over 20 years ago. It was not really covered at all.
What do you think about that omission now that you've kind of become the citizen of the world?
Now when I look back on it, I heard a story somewhere, and maybe I forget who said that, but they said, give me a child from the age of 0 to 7, and I can form the child for the rest of their life. And I've had to reflect in my life about the education that I got in these sorts of formative years. It's very hard to question something that you absorbed as a child. And not only in the curriculum, but then also in your community. It's a shared story. A lot of it is the implicit curriculum. Nobody talks about it, but somehow you know and you understand it and then becomes a part of you. It's been more of a soul-searching journey for me of questioning, did this really happen? Or was that part of a story that I was told? And then looking at present-day experiences and thinking, how does this compare to what happened in the past? Is it repeating itself? Is it not? So it's to me, a lot of soul-searching of who am I really? What are the stories that I was told? Are they real? Did it really happen? What does it mean if it's not real? And how does that affect everybody else around me? So I don't have a final answer, but it's more of this sort of soul searching of re-questioning what I was taught.
I think it makes a lot of sense that you are now a therapist. That's a whole lot of what we do. I want to take you to October 7th, ask you what that day was like for you and how your life has changed personally and professionally since this war started.
So my medical school was in Beersheba, Ben-Gurion University, so it was in the south. Where the massacres happened, I was not far away from that. And so when they talk about the kibbutzes, when they talk about the region, when they talk about all these areas, to me, I know the area. So watching the news, when I watched it, at first I couldn't believe it. And the way I reasoned it, I think in my mind was, I said, when the terrorists were doing what they were doing, the way I reasoned in my mind was they have to be on drugs. I couldn't fathom, even as a psychiatrist, I couldn't fathom somebody doing what they did with the atrocities without being the influence of any other substance. That was my way of trying to make sense of it at the beginning. I didn't believe it. And then I reasoned with it again through my psychiatry mind of like, okay, these people must be so dissociated that they can do this. That was my initial response. It can't be true. And then the more days passed, actually not even days, I think weeks passed, it began sinking in that this actually happened. But I still couldn't fully accept it because I'm also Arab. I'm from Israel. I'm Israeli, but I'm also Arab. And so to look at these terrorists, these Hamas terrorists, and see what they did, I had to reject a part of me because I'm Arab. I speak Arabic. They're Arabs. They speak Arabic. I couldn't accept that somebody who speaks Arabic like me is okay with doing this to people. And then I was seeing the cheering in the streets too. And I was in denial about it too. I just could not accept that I'm Arab like them and that I would be okay with what happened. And then my mind also, I reasoned, I said, okay, they must have just killed Jewish people. That was my mind of reasoning that this is going to happen to me. Because I would have been If I was back in med school or living in Beersheba, I might have been at the music festival. I would have been one of the people there. I like music festivals. So in my mind, I still reasoned with denial, saying, okay, they must have only killed Jewish people. And then as the news came out, it didn't matter if you were Jewish or not. They killed Bedouins that were Muslims like them. They killed Thai people. They killed all sorts of people. So then that layer of denial moved again. And so now it's been over 7 months. And I would say my denial layer is actually, I think it's been shattered, you know, and also understanding that this is about something a lot more. I don't even have the words to explain. I can't make sense of it. It's the best way that I can tell you. I tried making sense of it by saying, oh, it's based on religion. It's based on that. No. But now I also understand that there's no justification. And even when I say that, a layer of fear comes up because I have no sense of safety at all inside of me. With all these layers of denials that I had, it helped me somehow stay safe in my mind. And now that sense of safety or some sort of a barrier between me and the world or around me, it's gone. And it feels unsafe. And I'm saying this, I'm in the States. I'm not even in Israel.
So I think that speaks to personal process, a bit of a personal. I mean, I've had a similar feeling of almost unraveling
Yeah.
a little bit. Has this affected your work?
It has. It has, because it's given a different depth to trauma, a different depth to the understanding of the impact, not only of trauma, but of community and trauma.
Can you say more about the community piece?
You know, patients would come to me. There were people that never heard about, they had no connection at all to Israel or Palestinians or the Middle East at all, knew nothing. And all of a sudden, they were coming with all these feelings about things they've heard about, and then they've projected their own ideas about it, and then their feelings about justice. And I'm listening to them, and it's like I'm in two worlds. I'm in the world that they feel and project, and somehow they have no connection to personally. And then in my own world where I have personal connections. It's like they're two different worlds in a way, you know? That's one layer. The other layer are the people that are Jewish, that are impacted by the trauma, that come see me. And in a way, it's funny to say that, but I share that bubble of trauma with them. Even though I'm not Jewish like them, I'm from Israel, and I could have been killed just like anybody else there. It didn't matter that I was Arab. So this whole added layer of protection that I lost, my Jewish patients also lost that layer of protection. And somehow in this sort of shared common loss of protection, we form a way of understanding each other without even having words about it, you know? And then the other layer too is with my other fellow colleagues too, because there were colleagues that all of a sudden were making comments that were anti-Semitic. And that didn't set well with me. And so I would just point out, this is not appropriate, this is anti-Semitic, this is not safe. How would you take care of a Jewish patient with these sorts of views? And so then in these sorts of information or these sorts of exchanges, then I would get personally attacked rather than having an open discussion like you would with a colleague. So that in a way alienated me from certain colleagues too, you know, so it affected me personally. And then also when I'm meeting with the patients one-on-one, and then when I'm with other colleagues with these different views too.
Have you been more lonely since October 7th?
Yes. You know, it was sad. I've lost my Arab contacts. The friends that I had that are Arabs, or the colleagues that I had that are Arabs, I lost these connections. Because when I heard the comments that were being said, they were anti-Semitic. I mean, some of them were subtle, but they were anti-Semitic. And they were also said by people that have never been to Israel. And so, in my truth of having been born in Israel or raised there, I couldn't hold back either what I knew. And so then I would just simply speak of my experience. And by speaking of that experience, I lost these sorts of human connections that were Arab, you know. If I think of my community as, you know, having like different arms of the community, I lost one arm of the community, which is difficult. It's difficult.
And it also strikes me that there's kind of an invisibility piece here where you are Israeli and nobody that I know, and I'm in a Jewish community, would see that right away. And so this connection that you feel with a lot of folks in my part of the world would not be initially recognized. And I think it's very interesting. Maybe if you could speak for a minute about how we met.
How we met, there was a therapist online who was Jewish, and she found out that she got put on a list was called anti-Zionist list, and there was a list of therapists so that nobody refers to them because they're Zionist. I reached out to the therapist and I said, I'm sorry that you're dealing with this anti-Semitism. I have patients that are Jewish. If they're looking for therapy, I'll refer them to you. And so then she told me about a therapist group that was the Jewish therapist group.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked to join them. There were certain questions that you could ask, and one of them was say something in Hebrew. Well, I mean, if that's your criteria,
You're fluent in Hebrew.
I got that down. So I didn't lie. I said who I was, but I also wrote Hebrew. So I was allowed to join the group. And listening to the therapists' experiences, the Jewish therapists' experiences of how they were discriminated against, I saw the strength that they have. People were discriminated against me, but we're just going to keep going. But I thought these were stories of resilience. So I wanted to share these stories on my podcast. I wanted to bring the therapists to come and share what's it like to be a Jewish therapist in certain communities with certain patients. I wanted to bring out the stories of resilience that I see, because when I was in Israel, I was with Jewish patients. I got trained by Israeli physicians. Like the Jewish story for me is not some story somewhere else. I took care of Holocaust patients, Holocaust survivors. I have a strong connection. So I went to the group and I said, if anybody wants to come and share their story, come join my podcast. And so then it's just a feeling that I got that I'm not Jewish. And so not to be in the group, that I was impostoring or something.
And of course, all of us are feeling very defended right now. And I think you saw that. And I think we're both, clinicians, so we understand where that comes from. But it was an unfortunate thing to see.
My hope that what I bring to life and people that meet me and my patients, and just in general, when I live my life, to hold space for everything and everybody. It was not against me as a person, but it was my name getting othered. I could have explained and kept debating, but the last thing I want is to cause a space to be unsafe because of what I represent. And so then I said I would leave. In any circle most circles that I'm in, the first reaction that I get is I get othered. Actually, I think I'm used to getting othered.
That's right. I can't imagine that you wouldn't be used to that experience by now. You mentioned having worked in Israel and here with Jewish patients, with Holocaust survivors. I believe you were trained at Ben Gurion during a portion of the Second Intifada. So we've spoken a little bit about the fact that you also treated actual terrorists. Can you speak about that experience and how it impacted your ethics, your sense of Gaza, your sense of Israel, all of these kind of bigger questions about what it represented for you to do that?
I think it was 2008 or something like that. In Gaza the Hamas terrorists were sending missiles to Israel in the south. And, when you're in the hospital, you take care of patients. You're not involved with what the hospital decides, who comes your way. You do your job. And I remember we had one kid that was trying to cross over from Gaza. I don't know if he had bombs strapped on him. I don't know how he got injured. We were not privy to that, but he came to us with shrapnels. And so we went to the OR and he was taken care of surgically. I remember on the one hand, I was, learning medicine, practicing medicine, doing the actual medical care. But there inside of me, I had these questions, because the Palestinian narrative is that the Israelis want to kill the Palestinians and they're genocidal. That's the Palestinian narrative. But inside the Israeli hospital, that teenager was getting the same care as any other Israeli patient. And that was confusing to me. Not the actual care that we gave, but the narrative that I was told growing up was not matching the reality that I was in. And then the other thing too is that when the missiles would be arriving to the south where we're at, we all had to duck. If you're walking in the street, you have to duck. If you can access a bomb shelter, you go. And, I hid with my classmates, I hid with my neighbors. And I was remember thinking, wow, if this missile hits where I'm at, I'm going to die like anybody else with me. It didn't matter that I was Arab. And so the stories that I was told didn't match the reality that I saw. And with that sort of discrepancy, I began to examine my own beliefs, my own views of the world, how much it was shaped by stories that I was told, and it wasn't matching reality. And the other thing too, with the war, our physicians that were training us, they were called to what they call the Miluim, the reservists. And so they would come give us a lecture, They would come in dressed in their army uniforms, and we'd get our lecture and they're like, okay, now we're going to go. That's it. It was very much education under fire.
And you're referring to a war when you were training?
Yes, back in med school. Yeah. I was in med school from 2005 and then 2009.
So when you were starting med school, it sounds like the second Intifada was starting to come to a close.
Yeah.
We've talked about this. You're a minority in many ways. Talked about you're an Arab in Israel, you're a Christian among Muslims, you are now an immigrant in the United States, you are doing therapy in a field where there's a lot of psychopharmacology and less clinical work, therapeutic work. You've spoken a little bit about what it means to be a woman in all of these realms. Given all of these outsider identities, I'm sort of wondering what you feel many of us are missing in the conversation about what is happening in the Middle East right now. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of heat, and I'm curious what you think is not being represented.
What comes up to my mind is the relationship between the Arabs and the Jews in actual Israel. Because if you were to go to like Hadassah or Sharet Zedek or any hospital in Israel, you would have nurses taking care of you that are Arab. You'd have doctors that are taking care of Arab. I'm an Arab doctor. And you'd have pharmacists taking care of you that are Arab. And nobody's talking about how it is possible to have both Arabs and Jews together, working together, teaching each other, learning from each other, and it working for both sides. That's not talked about enough. And actually, Israel provides training, maybe not now with what's going on, but they do provide training to the Palestinian doctors in the West Bank. They want them to be resourced, so they will allow them to come to Israel to get training and then send them back. You don't know about that. It's not talked about. They'll have patients that need medical care from the West Bank, and they were doing that with people from Gaza, 2 patients from Gaza with certain permissions. They would allow them to come to Israeli hospitals to get treatment. That's not talked about.
So it sounds like what you see is that Israel is a place where there is the possibility of coexistence, and maybe that could be kind of a laboratory to grow from.
I've seen it happen, especially with education and professional training. I think there's something that changes or happens when people go through education and training. Then they start interacting with people. It really starts opening your eyes up to see a different world, more than these stories that got instilled in you when you're a child. Will this be enough to change a whole narrative of a population? I don't know, but it's a start.
And do you feel that Israelis and Jews right now are at risk of also maybe adopting a narrative that's going to be more divisive than it was before this war?
Maybe a minority, but not the majority. I think in order to survive the Holocaust and years of horrible, horrible things, and to still rise up and raise children and keep connections, you have to have a place for hope. And you have to have a place for peace. You have to believe that in order to keep growing as a community. So maybe the minority would have that because of fear, but I think the majority are not like that.
Let me ask you one last question. What do you think brought you to the field you're in? What do you think brought you to being a psychiatrist who's also a psychotherapist? And do these things relate?
I think so. Because like I told you, I grew up with all these stories, especially in East Jerusalem. It was not integrated part of Israel. And then in the 2000s onward, Jerusalem became very much integrated. And so there wasn't that much that separation. But for me growing up, there was a separation between populations. So then the stories were separate. But somehow when it came to getting healthcare, I got Israeli healthcare. So then I'd go see these physicians that were Israeli. They were Jewish. My physician, my dentists, I got healthcare from Israeli Jewish physicians. And so I remember watching them where I would be going in with these stories that I'm told to be scared of these people because they're Jewish, but they took care of me. And somehow there's an inspiration to me that touched me from these physicians that took care of me. And it did not matter that I was Arab. Something about that touched me. And then I understood about medicine knowing no boundaries. And that called to me. That sort of space where it's neutral. It doesn't matter who you are, what language you speak, and you're taken care of. But really, it was Jewish physicians That was kind of my contact.
It's really fascinating, and I find it very moving. So I want to thank you for joining this conversation, and I hope we see a continuation of your work.
I hope so too. Thank you.
I am an old soul, flame in a cold world, days when the wind blows hate from the shadows. Well, at first their voices rise, and the hate fills up their eyes. It's a tale as old as time, and the world just stands by. Not me. There's a new light, fire in a cold fight. Are the brave souls, light in a cold world.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to What Came After wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us online at whatcameafter.com.